Okay, so the next thing we need to get set up, I believe, is the producers themselves, which the foxes will be sort of a seed item. When you plant that on those little grassy spots we made before, that'll essentially become the producer. So it's kind of like the equivalent of the plant. So I generally start with the items first when I'm adding a new producer. We're adding 3 of them. We're adding a fox cub. We're adding a fox mom, a fox dad. In your game, you probably wouldn't want to name these this way, but my spelling's not the best, so to try and prevent mistakes, I tried to use easy IDs for this tutorial so that I wouldn't muck it up. For an item, the ID is going to be used later. We'll need this ID to know that we're like planting this into a producer, so we'll need this ID when we make the producer. The name is the player facing thing. Description will show up in your inventory when you look at something. We'll use the same context actions that everything else has. It's not an inventory. We do want to let you drop it. I'm going to put a stack limit in it because I don't want you to have a stack of 20 foxes in a slot in your inventory. Each fox will take its own slot. Now we need the drop template for the fox. And you can see I've already made all the art. There's nothing special about any of this art other than that its pivot point is sort of in the middle below its feet, right? That is the sort of the center bottom. For drops, it's more of like middle aligned. That's why these guys are sticking through the floor a little. But there's nothing special in the templates themselves. They're just art. So there we go. We've just dragged the templates from project content into the asset reference slot. Now we need to do the same thing for the icon asset. The icon camera ID, you can leave that blank unless you're using multiple icon generators in your scene. That other thing I put in was the drop template. That's the thing that'll show up when the fox is dropped on the ground. Okay, let's get the icon assets in here. These will be what shows up in your inventory. Okay, these are 3D icons, so make sure you check that box. It is equipable, like you can hold it in your hand and then affect a gatherable or a producer with it. Anything that you can like hold in your hand to do something with, or just hold in your hand visually because you want to for fun, needs to be set to can equip. Equipment template can be set to the same thing as these others. It can just be set to hand tool look. It only needs to be different if you want to override the art and animations in a specific way like you would for a tool, like an axe or a shovel or something. Equipment visual template is an optional thing. This is how I make you hold a seed packet, for example, is putting the art for a seed packet in here. Details text lets you just put in a longer, more descriptive thing. Okay, so that's fine. We have our items. I think the next thing I actually want to set up is a drop data. The reason that we need a drop data for the fox is if you purchase a fox from the pet store, that's a drop. And if you decide to pick the fox up off the grass, like you want to move it to a new spot, that would count as a drop as well. So we need drop data. I've been typing a lot of these table names in because I just know them now. I've had to go into these same things so often. But you can find the drops table right here, the one that's hooked up, and you can find the items table right here. Just click that little pencil and it'll open. They're both under inventory, items, and drops. We're not going to put this at the very bottom. We're going to put this at the bottom of just the item section, which is right here. So if we notice in the drops table, a drop can either be an item ID, a currency ID, or an upgrade ID. So it can only be one thing at a time, right? The hearts we added were currencies. They have an ID in for currency. A land expansion is an upgrade, so it has an ID here. An item has an ID in this column because it's an item. We've added 3 there. their item IDs are what we just created, right? They're these same IDs from right here, and they go in this column here. Then we need a name for this drop, so that should be fine. It's mostly going to be a store purchase drop too. We want it to drop same as the other ones we added for the placeable producer bases. Buy one, we only want you to get one of them, and we want you to get 100% of the time. So same settings, one in the min, one in the max, and 100% in the chance. And that should be it for that table for now. If you go into producers and buffs, the next one we're going to want to do is this producer states. So if we hit edit on that, this is the one where we set up the art. So we're going to need to add a set of states for each of the items that we just added. For the sake of saving ourselves confusion later, I'm going to name these a little bit funny. I'm going to say that this is a fox cub grazing because I want to differentiate it from the one that we're going to add later where it's a producer that's breeding. And it'll have different behavior and be its own producer. So because of that, just these producer IDs, because this producer states ID, we're going to use again over in the, we'll use the same ID as our producer ID just to save ourselves confusion. So that's why I added grazing to the name. So I know it's a little bit funny, foxes aren't really grazers, but that's fine. Next we need some foxes. I didn't really do a bunch of special art for these. Let's go get all our fox cub art. So we already used the drop and the icon, right? And the only other art I have is a client and a static. Now, you could have the fox changing visually as it's waiting for food or for other reasons. But again, to keep this tutorial fairly small and simple, I'm not going to do that. So what we are going to do is reuse this art in quite a few different states. So this is the cub and it's standing. So I'm going to put this one here. The static one is just a collider. And then the client one is the visuals. So if we take a look here, you can see that they all look like foxes. That's the client asset we're looking at right now. But if we turn on player collision, you'll see that the three back ones have now turned into just boxes. And if you look here, that's a cube that's inside the static thing. But I have the visibility forced off. So in the default view, you can't see it. But if you walk into the fox or click the fox, you're going to be interacting with that cube, not the visual model. The reason I did that is if we go back to this player collision view, you can see this circle thing here, this wireframe. That's actually what the fox's collision looks like, and that's quite different than the volume of the fox that a player might want to click on to feed it. So instead of using the circle, I made a box that's sort of the bounds of the fox so that the player is less likely to get frustrated when they can't click on the animal. The play state is normally sort of the state that you put a seed in or something and then you'd like water it and then it starts growing. But I found that for some things it's better to just have a play state in even if your thing is going to automatically start growing. I found that the behavior of the producers is a little better if I do that. So in a case like this, I'm just going to put one in there. It's not going to hurt anything. So my play state is now that those two pieces of art. Now I need the building state. And again, we're just going to use the same art. We're going to put the static here and the client here. We don't have to use the same art. I'm just doing it because it makes life easier. And we don't need any other building states for this one because it doesn't change visually. So there's no reason to use any of these other states. But we do need a ready state and a rebuilding state. The rebuilding state is going to get used on anything that you can feed multiple times or that stays existing after the first time. So, for example, if you plant a carrot, then you harvest it once. It doesn't need a rebuilding state. But if you plant an apple tree and then you harvest it again, it does need a rebuilding state. So this fox doesn't vanish once you gather hearts from it. It stays there and keeps producing hearts. So we need to use a rebuilding state in that case. So again, we're just going to use the same two pieces of art. There's our static. Oops, I'm trying to put it in the wrong spot. So there's our rebuilding state 1 client and a rebuilding state 1 static. And then the last place we need, as I mentioned before, is the ready state, client and static. Same thing, we're just using the same art. So we'll put the client here and we'll put the static here. Now we need to go and do that again for the other foxes. Just to reiterate, there's nothing special about these templates. Right now, at least, there's not. They're just as I've shown you. Their art, the visual art is in one and the collisions in the other. There's a pivot at the bottom, but you can make these look any way you want. A producer can look like a building or a plant or an animal, it doesn't matter. We're not going to use the expired state because it would make people sad if their pets died. Although you could use the expired state kind of like the way that Farmville does, and you could just make it so that an animal after a certain amount of time or whatever just becomes like old, and then you could retire it to pasture rather than killing it. So that could be something you could do. Or you could make it so it looks like it escaped. That would be fun. Okay, that should be all the visual states we need for our 3 foxes. So the next table is the bigger table that we need to do, and that's the producer's table itself. So remember, your things always need unique IDs, and anything that has a unique storage ID, that means a unique number in that table. So the easiest thing to do is just count up. So that's why the new ones I just added are 18, 19, and 20. So the source item ID, that's the seed that you use to plant this producer. So in our case, that's these items that we made. And the number of seeds it takes, that's this one here. It's funny that it's called number of seeds, but we have it called source item ID. That's maybe a little confusing, but it's the number of seeds is the number of the source item ID that we want. Just one, because again, it'd be odd if we needed multiples. Valid producer base types. Now, we made a producer base for this in the previous one, if you'll remember. We can check in our placeables table for the name we used. So if we go to placeables, there we go, producer base type. So this is essentially like a tag or an ID that we need. So we called the spots to put the foxes animal spot. That's what we need. We will paste that into here. Now we need how long it'll take for the fox to produce a heart. And we're going to just keep it short for now, because what we're trying to do is test our system, right? We leave the number of collects at 0 if you can just collect as many times as you want. But the fox cub is kind of an exception, because I don't really want it to stay small forever, right? I want it to grow up. Let's say that you can collect 3 times from the baby fox, and then that's as much as you can collect before it's done. And then we'll select auto build, because you don't have to click it or anything to start building. It'll actually receive a buff to start building. So we'll check these boxes. Auto rebuild, again, should be checked. Auto collect. Okay, so what we actually want here in our case is for the fox cub on its final collect. There's this checkbox called replace producer on final collect. That can replace this producer ID with a different producer ID the last time that you gather hearts from it. So what we're going to do is we're going to make it turn into one of these 2 producers on its final collect. So you collect 3 times from the baby, and then it'll grow up into a grown-up. There's no weighting control of this. It'll just pick from any list of IDs you have here. So right now we'd have a 50-50 chance of it turning into a mom or a dad fox on the final collect. The producer states ID, that's what we just set up. That's the producer states are the visuals for these. So that was these IDs here, which we made match our producer IDs anyway, so we could actually just copy them from here. So that's what connects the art to the other producer information. We're not going to let these expire, so we don't need any of those things. Valid place tool hand should be fine. You don't need any special tools to put down these guys. We'll let you pick them up with a hammer for now, but we might actually want that to be something different. Like maybe you need a cage or a leash or something, right, to pick them up off their base. Collect tool type is just empty, then it'll let you collect with just anything, so that's fine. It just means when the hearts are ready, you can just pet your fox and you'll get them. This is just a piece of text to tell the player what to do. Placement preview is what it's going to look like to the player when they're putting it on the grass. They can see what they're doing. We're going to use the client art because that was the one that actually had the fox visual in it. Should have actually called it Fox Kit, probably not Cub, but whatever, it's fine. Okay, we need just a special effect when we're putting it down. We'll just reuse this place on dirt one. A collect effect. So what effect should we have when we're gathering hearts from it? Just for fun, something different. We'll use, let's do our honey collect sound. And we'll just pick another dirt one here for the remove effect. Drop on collect. Drop behavior I have set to community by default on most things in the farming framework. So if your friend's standing nearby, they can get carrots or whatever you want to. But you don't really want a cheat that infinitely multiplies foxes, which is what having that set that way on this one would do. Let me think how I want to set this up. So the reason we're using solo behavior here is because we actually don't care for the hearts. It would have been fine for all the nearby players to be able to pick up the hearts. But we're going to make it so that if you click on the fox, you can get the fox back. So if we set this to community, then everyone standing nearby would get a fox when you picked up the fox. So then you could pick up your fox. You and your friend would both get a copy. Then you'd put one of them down and then pick it up, and you and your friend would both get a copy, and you'd have like a fox making machine. So we don't really want that. So we're going to set these to solo. Here's where we're going to need the drop ID for the hearts in this drop IDs. So let's go there. That's the one that we made in the first video, and we called it heart single. Now, in general, if you destroy a producer, you don't get anything back unless it's been specified here. See how it says place drops, building drops? These mean that if this producer is destroyed in any of these phases, then the player gets that object back. So that's what we want in this case, so that no matter when they break the thing, like if they want to pick the fox up, they can get it back up. So the queen bee actually works the same way as we want these fox drops to work. It's the name of the drop ID that we're going to need here. So that was over in our drops table. Let's just peek there. We called the drop fox cub single for this one. And we want you to get it back if you pick it up during its building state, if you pick it up during its placed state. Don't stick it in with this hearts one, because if you did that, then they would get a fox and a heart every time it produced. That's not what we want. We only want to give the fox back if they try to pick it up. Rebuilding state we need, and expired state we don't, because we didn't make our fox expire. So let's go get the other two. And that should be it, since we don't need to do the producer buff IDs yet. We'll do them later. Let's save that. So let's do one final thing so that we can test what we just put in. Let's add our new items to our cheat starting item table that we're using right now. I have a temporary table set here just to give me lots of items to test with. This is not what a player will actually get. They'll get a table with far fewer things in it. It's just the easiest way to test out what we've done. Okay, let's hit play and see if we forgot anything. Don't forget to hit F1 when you've given yourself new starting items so that you'll actually see them. If I hit my I key now, I should have my foxes. Yep. I'll have to adjust their icons, but they exist and that's all we want for now. There's my tiny baby fox. First grown-up fox. They're very small. Much smaller than they're supposed to be. I'm gonna have to see what I've done there. Okay, so that's working. They're all showing up, but they're tiny. So we have to go figure out why we have tiny foxes. I probably messed up the template. Okay, so it took me a few minutes, but I poked around and I found the mistake that's making my foxes tiny. If we look at the producer base, grassy spot, it has a standing spot inside it. We referenced on the outside, it's a producer group, but it's got some scale left on it from something. It's scaled to 0.5, so that's why our foxes are coming out half size. So I just need to go and zero the scale on the standing spot inside of the producer base. I normally do my testing in multiplayer mode, but when you're trying to track down things like this and click it in the hierarchy to try to see what's wrong, single player mode is where you want to be. So you can like grab stuff and look at what's going wrong. So let's stop that and let's go fix that problematic piece. We have a client and a static. Could be wrong in both of them. 0.5 and 0.5, yeah. So reset those to 1, update them both, and delete them both, and we can hit play, and we should be good. There we go, our foxes are not super tiny anymore, and they're all working fine. So this video is already pretty long, so I will stop this and we'll do the setup of the food buckets in the next video.